Well, here we are again in Studio B at 62 College Street. And I've got a couple of different versions I want to read. This one is, again, from Good as News, a radical retelling of Scripture. The author makes it clear in his foreword that all versions are subjectively done, and he wants Scripture to have a certain punch that it can not have if the translation is either so bland or so particular that it doesn't mean anything to people. Here's how he translates. There once was a very wealthy man named Desmond who dined out every day dressed in the most expensive clothes. Near the entrance to his luxury apartment, a homeless man called Larry slept rough. He was unwell and badly nourished, and sometimes had to make do with what Desmond threw into the bin. His only friends were stray dogs. One day Larry died and was the guest of honor at a party given by Abraham. Soon after, Desmond died and was buried. He found himself in a miserable and hopeless place. In great distress, he looked up and saw Abraham and Larry far away, enjoying their food together. Desmond cried out, "Dear Abraham, please help me. Send Larry this way with something cool for me to drink. I'm parched." But Abraham said, "Remember, my boy, when you were alive, you had it good, whereas Larry had a rough time of it. He's having a good time now, and you're suffering. In any case, there's no transport to get us to you, or you to us." Desmond said, "Then, sir, please send him to my hometown where I have 5 brothers still alive. Tell him to warn them so they don't end up in this horrible place." Abraham said, "They've got the old books. All they have to do is to take notice of what they say." "No, Abraham, sir, that doesn't work. But I'm sure if someone visited them from the dead, they would take notice." Abraham said, "If they don't pay any attention to the old books, they won't listen to someone who comes back to them from the dead." This version is the Cotton Patch version, and I like it in part because it works hard and finds ways to give bits of Scripture a real punch by not bothering to translate certain words that mean nothing to us anymore. The other reason I like it is because it allows us to remember that Scripture at its best is timeless. That what Jesus had to say, he would say today, or 1970 when this was written. And maybe more than that, the Cotton Patch version also knows its audience. Like Jesus, the Cotton Patch is speaking to those people who are listening. And not to all ages, in all centuries, in all cultures and society. The Cotton Patch is speaking to southern rural Americans in 1970. And they were remarkably racist, remarkably sexist, and yet still laid claim to being remarkably Christian. And so the Cotton Patch knows that audience and speaks to them in a way that Jesus would speak to them if Jesus was speaking in the particular. Here's the parable from the Cotton Patch. Once there was a rich man who put on his tux and stiff shirt and staged a big affair every day. And there was laid at his gate a poor guy by the name of Lazarus, full of sores, and so hungry he wanted to fill up on the rich man's table scraps. On top of this, the dogs came and licked his sores. It so happened that the poor fellow died, and the angels seated him at the table with Abraham. The rich man died too, and was buried. And in the hereafter, the rich man, in great agony, looked up and saw from afar Abraham and Lazarus sitting beside him at the table. So he shouted up to him, "Mr. Abraham, please take pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in some water and rub it over my tongue, because I'm scorched in this heat." Abraham replied, "Boy, you remember that while you were alive, you got the good things, the good jobs, schools, streets, houses, etc. Well, at the same time, Lazarus got the leftovers. But now, here he's got it made, and you're scorching. And on top of all this, somebody has dug a yawning chasm between us and you, so that the people trying to get through from here to you can't make it. And neither can they get through from there to us." The rich man said, "Well then, Mr. Abraham, will you please send him to my father's house? For I have 5 brothers. Let him thoroughly warn them, so they won't come to this hellish condition." And Abraham said, "They've got the Bible and the preachers. Let them listen to them." "But," he said, "no, they won't do that, Mr. Abraham. But if somebody will go to them from the dead, they'll change their ways." He replied, "Well, if they won't listen to the Bible and the preachers, they won't be persuaded even if someone does get up from the dead." Hi. This version is called The Message. Eugene Peterson wrote it 15, 20 years ago. And here it is. There once was a rich man, expensively dressed in the latest fashions, wasting his days in conspicuous consumption. A poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, had been dumped on his doorstep. All he lived for was to get a meal from scraps off the rich man's table. His best friends were the dogs who came and licked his sores. Then he died, this poor man, and was taken up by the angels to the lap of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In hell and in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham in the distance and Lazarus in his lap. He called out, "Father Abraham, mercy, have mercy. Send Lazarus to dip his finger in water to cool my tongue. I'm in agony in this fire." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that in your lifetime you got the good things and Lazarus the bad things. It's not like that here. Here he's consoled and you're tormented. Besides, in all these matters there is a great, huge chasm set between us, so that no one can go from us to you, even if he wanted to, nor can anyone cross from you to us." The rich man said, "Then let me ask you, Father, send him to the house of my father, where I have 5 brothers, so he can tell them the score and warn them, so they won't end up here in this place of torment." Abraham answered, "They have Moses and the prophets to tell them the score. Let them listen to them." "I know, Father Abraham," he said, "but they're not listening. If someone came back to them from the dead, they would change their ways." Abraham replied, "If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to be convinced by someone who rises from the dead." A decade before the Cotton Patch version, and 5 decades before the Good as New version, and maybe 4 decades before the Message, B Phillips wrote a New Testament. And he was a scholar and theologian. He was maybe best known for a book called "Your God is Too Small." I've always thought that title was pretty apt for just about everybody and everything. But here's how he dealt with this story. There was once a rich man who used to dress in purple and fine linen and lead a life of daily luxury. And there was a poor man called Lazarus who was put down at his gate. He was covered with sores. He used to long to be fed with the scraps from the rich man's table. Yes, and the dogs used to come and lick his sores. Well, it happened that the poor man died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And from among the dead he looked up and saw Abraham a long way away, and Lazarus in his arms. "Father Abraham," he cried out, "please pity me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I'm in agony in these flames." But Abraham replied, "Remember, my son, that you used to have the good things in your lifetime, while Lazarus suffered the bad. Now he is being comforted here, while you are in agony. And besides this, a great chasm has been set between you and us, so that those who want to go to you from this side cannot do so, and people cannot come to us from your side." At this he said, "Then I beg, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. He could warn them about all this and prevent their coming to this place of torture." But Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets. They can listen to them." Ah, no, Father Abraham, he said. If only someone were to go to them from the dead, they would change completely. But Abraham told him, if they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, they would not be convinced even if someone were to rise from the dead.